Welcome to 5 Minutes in the Word, a daily devotional in the Word of God. Welcome back to 5 Minutes in the Word. We are so glad you decided to join us for today's study. Today we're going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 17, and today we're going to be talking about David and Goliath. Now, this is a story that has always fascinated me, and it's a story that I think we can learn a lot of valuable lessons from David, lessons from the Philistines, from Goliath, and also lessons from Saul and the armies of Israel. And so we're not going to have time to read the entire lesson, but we are going to start here in the opening verses, just kind of setting the battle scene a little bit. And so here, starting in chapter 17 and verse 1, it says, "Now the Philistines gathered their armies together to battle, and were gathered at Socoh, which belongs to Judah. They encamped between Socoh and Azekah and Ephes-dammim, and Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together, and they encamped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in battle array against the Philistines. The Philistines stood on one mountain, on the mountain on one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with the valley between them." And I think this is a part of the story that as a kid I overlooked, that I kind of read past this part, but really you have both armies on the side of mountains with a valley below, and that's going to be their battlefield. That's going to be in which they would normally come together, come to blows in this battle. Now you're going to see here that instead of both armies just in full attack, you're going to have a champion from this army of the Philistines. He's going to be basically here on this mountainside, and he's going to be calling out to the armies of Israel. And as we see here, he was a giant of a man. When you read in verses 4 through 7, you see how large he was. It says he was 6 cubits and a span, which is quite tall. You see he had a bronze helmet on his head, coat of mail. It said the coat weighed 5,000 shekels of bronze. He had bronze armor on his leg and a javelin on his shoulders. It said the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, which I'm told is huge. And his iron spear weighed 600 shekels, and a shield bearer went before him. So here was a man, he was ready to fight, he knew how to fight, and he is challenging the armies of Israel. In fact, he says it point blank in verse 10, he says, "I defy the armies of Israel." He wanted somebody to come fighting, and if the Israelite won, the Philistines would serve them, but if Goliath won, the Israelites would have to serve the Philistines. And so when they heard this, when Saul and the people of Israel, when the armies of Israel heard this, they shook in fear. So the text says they were dismayed and were greatly afraid. And so a couple of points I want to point out already is that how dare an army like the Philistines ever come up before God and his people and think they're going to win? How dare this soldier in Goliath think that he's going to be able to really challenge God and think he's going to prevail? But then where was Saul's faith? Where was the faith of the armies of Israel? What were they doing? Why were they just standing there? And I don't think I'm alone in that, because that's basically what happens when David comes and he approaches. He wants to know, who's going to fight this man. He wants to know, what's going to be given, and if whoever wins this battle. But David, he talks about this, and he starts in verse 26, and it says, "David spoke to the men who stood by him, saying, 'What shall be done for the man who kills the Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel?'" He found this as a personal attack. This wasn't just about what he was going to get. This was a personal attack against God's people. He says, "For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" See, he knew who was fighting for him. He knew who was going to be on his side. And so David was ready to fight. David, and these words, they get back to Saul, and Saul is just kind of, I guess perplexed. He's kind of struck for a moment. And so you're going to see that he's going to send him off with his armor. This doesn't work out. And so you come to verse 40, and it says, talk about David, "Then he took his staff in his hand, and he chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook, and put them in a shepherd's bag, in a pouch which he had, and his sling was in his hand." So here, he's drawing near to this Philistine with a slingshot and a few rocks. And so the Philistine came and began drawing near to David, and the man who bore the shield went before him. And when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was only a youth, ruddy and good looking. So the Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you have come to me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field." So this Philistine just thought David was nothing. He thought he was coming out here to him with like sticks, with just just no kind of real armament or weaponry. This Philistine was honestly probably just thought he was being mocked in this kind of way. Now, I will say this. a shepherd's sling was no ordinary weapon. This was a weapon that had been used probably numerous times to defend against animals and maybe other things that were coming after sheep. And so these slingshots could be very powerful, but that's not what David was fighting with. Yes, he had a slingshot. Yes, he had 5 stones. He might have thought he needed more than one shot. I don't know why exactly he had 5. But what I do know is he knew who was fighting on his side. And that's really the point of our lesson today. It says in verse 45, then David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin. Those are his weapons. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you and take your head from you. And this day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Then all the assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with the sword and the spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. And so David knew he was fighting with God. He knew God was the one going to actually give the victory. It wasn't about swords. It wasn't about spears. It wasn't even about a slingshot and a rock. It was about God, and David was going to stand with God. And so that's what happens. The Philistine is going to draw near to meet David. David hurried. He ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. David put his hand in his bag, took out a stone, and he slung it and struck the Philistine in the forehead. And this is going to bring this man down. It says the stone sank into his forehead. He fell on his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone and struck the Philistine and killed him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood over the Philistine, took his sword and drew it out of its sheath and killed him and cut off his head with it. So here David, he is able to conquer, not because of a slingshot, not because of a rock, not because of a sword or any kind of armament, but because he was fighting with God, and God is the one that gave the victory. And that's something that I want each of us to know. We can't fight against God. God is always going to win. We shouldn't be people that shake in fear, because God is going to be with us if we will let him, if we will follow him and trust in him. And if we do, like David, and have a faith like that, then we can overcome. Because God has already won the victory. Jesus Christ has already won. And if we are in him, we can have those blessings in him and be assured that one day when Christ comes back, for those that are faithful, for those that endure, that he is going to take us home. So today, let's be like David. Let's have a faith, and let's continue to fight the good fight and fight it with God.